This is episode number 17, featuring Gil Dellinger. Welcome to the PleinAir Podcast from PleinAir Magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we dive deeply into the world of outdoor painting called plein air painting. For those of you who don't know, it's a French term. Plein air essentially means in the open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air, others pronounce it plein air, but no matter what you call it, it is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is all about the movement, the painters, the collectors, the galleries, and the art. This week's podcast is brought to you by the Publishers Invitational Paint Camp in the Adirondacks, which is coming up next week. It's my desire to see more people fall in love with plein air painting, and you can help by sharing this podcast with your friends on social media or on email, and I hope you'll subscribe to it so it comes to you every week. And also go on iTunes and leave your reviews. We'd love to hear about them. If you have feedback or interview requests, email me, Eric, at pleinairmagazine.com. The interview is brought to you by easelbrushclip.com. Well, let's get right to our interview with artist Gil Dellinger. Hey, Gil.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm great. It's a lovely day here in Laguna.
You're in Laguna. Well, I was going to ask you that question. You're all over the map lately. So how long have you been in Laguna?
I've been living in Laguna for about 3 months. I moved down from Bend, Oregon, and then I finally went up and sold my place and got my things. And so I'm slightly downsized, but I have a good studio, and I'm renting Ken Oster's studio since he passed, and it's a thrill to be in there. Although it is one disaster area because Ken has worked in 3 colors and black and white or whatever it was, and he has everything is gray because of the way he worked. He worked in the grays, and so it's dripped everywhere. It's fascinating.
Well, I hope that you've documented that, taken a lot of photographs of it, the way that it was before you moved in.
Yes, we did. We were very systematic about that.
So, Gil, for the people who may not be completely familiar with you, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of what it is that you do, what your passions are as a painter, and kind of what you've done with your career.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the career. I didn't know what I was going to do. I took a drawing class at Cal State Hayward and fell in love with drawing, and that was almost 50 years ago. I'm 73 now. I started drawing and painting. Went for a master's degree and taught 30 years at the University of Pacific in drawing and painting. And from there, in 2001, I retired to paint full time. Now, while I was teaching, I was painting 5 hours a day. They required us to maintain a professional career, and then in 1991, I won an award in the university for painting for contribution to my profession and for teaching.
So you were painting 5 hours a day above and beyond your teaching.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I that did require some sacrifices, and my wife at the time was very patient with me. And I began to slowly, steadily progress in my career, and for the period from 1987 to almost 2000, I worked exclusively in pastel. because of the drawing. I loved the drawing of it, and occasionally started to work in acrylic again. I had originally been an acrylic painter, and then from 2001 through the present time, I've been working in three mediums. I work in acrylic mostly. Occasionally I'll do a pastel, and particularly on location. And then I occasionally will work in oil, but usually I underpaint my oil paintings with acrylic.
And it seems to me I remember you saying that you were using water-soluble oils. Is that right?
I am. Yes, I am, and I love them. Two brands. Duo is very good, which is by Holbein, but my favorite is Cobra, which is made by Rembrandt, and it's just really, really, really a fine product.
So let me ask you the question. We'll get back to the other in a second, but while we're on that subject, is that water-soluble oils have to be done differently. Obviously, the benefit to water-soluble oils that I find, I travel with them when I go to Europe because I don't want to have to go find mineral spirits.
Yeah.
One of the other benefits is you're taking more chemicals out of your life. But how do you paint with them and do it effectively? I found it to be a little bit of a struggle. What's the key? What's the magic?
Well, I know I don't do this, but I know that Chuck Waldman puts a couple of drops of mineral spirits into his water, which makes them. But the truth of the matter is, they are simply oil paint with an emulsifier. So they're not much different. Particularly the Rembrandt brand, there's hardly any difference. And the only thing that I notice, I should inject that early on, both Winsor Newton and Grumbacher had less superior brands. I don't know if Winsor Newton is still on the market. It is very good, but it is not as good as the other two brands I mentioned, Holbein and Cobra by Rembrandt. The only thing that I find that is difficult is washes with the dark colors, with black or with a deep brown. It doesn't seem to hold quite as much intensity as oil paint. Otherwise, I find absolutely no difference.
So do you start out when you do if you were doing an initial layer in a traditional oil setting with maybe some mineral spirits or something, do you do a thin layer with the Cobras or with the Duos?
I try, but for the most part, I'm a better painter when I can layer. So therefore, that's why I underpaint. The big underpaint with acrylic. The big and I did check with the chemists that work with Rembrandt.
Cobra is a brand made by Rembrandt.
That's right, and it's the same oil paint. It just has an emulsifier in it. So that like the way the masters underpainted with tempera often, and then overglazed with oil. That's sort of the technique I use.
Okay, so you underpaint with acrylic.
I do,
and that way and it's the reason so that you can get it dry rapidly.
Yes, so I can get it dry rapidly, and I can build up color on color, and get layers, because my work depends primarily on light and the way light moves across forms and in forms, and that's my easiest way to quickly capture that essence. And the reason I underpaint outside with it is because acrylic dries fast outside, and it's a bother. So I'll just use I'll block in big shapes, and then I'll work over with a thin wash of oil, and then eventually a stronger, thicker wash. But I don't use very much thick paint. Some.
Okay.
So,
all right. I was talking to.
Did I make that clear?
Yeah, I think so. I was talking to Kyle Richardson.
Yeah.
Richardson,
Yeah.
who is the distributor of the Cobra brand, and I was having some problems, and it turned out the problem was that I was painting on oil primed canvases, and he said it's better to paint on an acrylic canvas or on a paper with that. So that's one of the things that I learned. Okay, so let's go back to the story. I'm sorry to take that little that sidebar there, but I just wanted to grab it while you were talking about it. So you
Oh no! That's important to my technique. So, and what you've said too. So anyway, go ahead.
So you're primarily if 80%, 60% of your time is done in acrylic or in pastel?
Probably 80% of my time is done in acrylic.
Okay.
I think it's such a wonderful medium if you learn how to use it.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I have found about acrylics is that it dries so fast. So there's a series of new acrylics out there that are a little less fast drying. Are you using those? Are you using traditional acrylics? And how do you deal with the drying?
Well, I use a number of brands, but no, I don't use the open acrylics. For some reason, the retarder they use in there, I react to. I get a headache from. So what I do is I use primarily. There's an Oregon brand named Graham. The pigmentation is extraordinary. I also use Utrecht, which have much more body than any others, and then I use Golden, and occasionally I will use a Rembrandt acrylic. But for the most part, I build in thin layers with acrylic, and then finally finish out with a little bit thicker layer. But I may build 4 or 5 layers. Now outside, of course, that isn't convenient. So that's why I will build a single layer or a couple, and then come in immediately and work over the top in something that doesn't dry quite as fast.
And do you use any kind of retardant, or is it strictly or is it just strictly water?
No, I don't use any water at all much. I use several mediums.
Oh, really?
And I can explain that.
Okay.
First of all, as a retarder, when I get up, well, let me say how I start. I start, and I found this by accident because Liquitex makes such great mediums, and I thought I was buying gesso, and I bought clear gesso. And what clear gesso does, I just happened to mix it with my paint. I don't know how that started. But I found that in the first layer, instead of mixing any water with it, I mixed clear gesso. And what it does is it doesn't dull or thin out the color so much. It holds the color, but it also creates a wonderful tooth when mixed. So that my first washes are done not with water, but with clear gesso.
You know, you may have just told us something that you invented that nobody else has ever done.
Maybe so. It makes it. This is what it does. It makes a fabulous surface for grabbing the oil paint if I go and finish in oil, or if I'm on a panel, it makes a wonderful underpainting for a pastel. So because it has just enough tooth to hold whatever layer you come over the top. Generally, I'll finish all the way through with acrylic, but it really, really, really makes a wonderful medium surface that you can dry brush over, or you can glaze over, or you can get the textures, because one of the things that's been fascinating me for the last 5 years is the way texture is used, the way textures in tree or in the water or whatever, or rock faces. I've been fascinated by rock faces. So by underpainting with the clear gesso, it doesn't affect the color. It looks, when it comes out of the tube, out of the jar, it looks milky, but it dries clear. So I will put that on first. Then if I use that for a couple of layers to build up this nice grabbing tooth, then I will seal off with a gloss or a satin medium, so that the paint is no longer being absorbed, but there's a layer between that holds the color to the surface.
So what medium are you using?
Generally I'll just use a Liquitex gloss medium.
Okay. And then next, go ahead.
All right. So I'll isolate it. It's like an isolating varnish. I will then use the medium I use that's the most effective and also curbs drying time significantly is a golden product called acrylic glazing liquid. It doesn't say slow dry on it. It used to, but it is slow drying. So if I'm doing a sky, I can do a lot of subtlety. It stays open about 20 minutes, and is you can create marvelous little glazes with it. So it's called acrylic glazing liquid, and I use the gloss, although it comes in a satin and it comes in a matte. But to keep the intensity of the color, you have to use a gloss. And that's the way I get the light I use, because I'll build a light running in and do some glazes in between. For example, if I have a strong afternoon light, I might glaze very thinly over the whole form in the color of what the light is at that time of the day, and then I'll build in my highlights over the top of that finally. So it's a series of built up layers that create the illusion of light.
So oftentimes I'll see acrylic paintings that look shinier than oil paintings. Is that a desired effect? Is that something that can be prevented?
Yeah, you just use a satin instead of a gloss. Unfortunately, it's been my experience that matte mediums kind of dull it, but a good satin, or mixing a little matte into your satin is in between a matte and a gloss. But I use this acrylic glazing liquid as a varnish finally, and it gives it an absolutely even surface.
Okay.
So it really is quite a remarkable product. Golden has made some fabulous stuff too.
All right, terrific. So I've learned a lot, because any time that I've experimented with acrylic paint, I've been extremely frustrated, but I was using water. I had no idea about any of these things, and so now I'm going to go out to the art store and buy a bunch of new stuff and experiment with it. I think you'll find it
rewarding. It's very satisfying, and the clear gesso keeps the color really nice and intense. Now, the other thing that I use that is really important to this process is I buy Art Bin solutions boxes. They have 18 They come in different sizes, and they have 18 segments. And I put in each segment, I put my color, because I use a lot of color. I'm the opposite of a limited palette person.
Okay.
But anyway, I put in each of those little segments almost a whole tube of paint, and then when I close it, if I were to just give it a little spray, just enough to keep it moist inside, and close it off, and not open it for a month or two, it will be the same. It will be it, and then I don't have to go. You know how frustrating it is to go searching for tubes when you're in the middle of something.
Yes, I do.
So I don't have to hassle, and the paint is always wet. And when I run out of paint on my box, I go in my easel box. I go in and I'll grab some right out of that same color, and it's just right up there, so there's no time lost. Well, it's a technique I learned from Marcia Burt, who keeps her paint in a tackle box, closes it off, slightly mists it, closes it off, and then when she comes to the next place she is, there's her paint. So
is she acrylic?
She's acrylic, yeah. She's always doing just acrylic.
All right. So what about PleinAir? Are you using the acrylic in PleinAir painting, or are you doing something different outdoors?
Well, I do two things outdoors. If it's a cool day and it's not direct sun, I can use acrylic all I want. If it is, and there's a hot wind or something, and so my acrylic is being frustrating me, I'll underpaint with it and make the masses, and then I'll use the oil. Or I work just simply in pastel on for my outdoor work because it isn't affected by wind or whatever.
So it's very unusual, Gil, that to have a painter who's using three different mediums there's kind of a theory of if you have too many things, you lack focus, or you can't master any one of them. How do you deal with that? How did you just got so good at each one individually?
Yeah, I'm not as good with oil, I'll be frank. Acrylic and if I were to start an oil painting traditionally, I'd have a mess. So one of the reasons why I use an acrylic underpainting is because I can build my layers and get the kind of quality of light I want.
Well, why don't you talk about mass a little bit for those people who might not be familiar with the concept, because they may think you're talking about going to church.
Oh, okay. Which I do. But the mass is the generalized neutral tone of an entire area. If you're painting a tree, massing in the foliage might mean putting in the darks and the lights but no details. Blocking in a face might mean putting in in massing a face might mean putting in the shapes, the big shapes. If I'm massing in a painting with deep space, massing in the tonal value of each area separately. So I'm creating the space the first thing I'm in the painting. So when I approach a painting, the first thing I look for is the big shapes, like many other artists, most other outdoor painters. But then I will I'll mask them in a general tone, so that they create the place where the space first, because I don't think of designing as top to bottom and side to side, but I think of designing as from top to bottom, side to side, and front to back. So I want to make sure that every value of every area is correct. Because one of the things I've found with students is that their main problem is with value. So
okay,
I like
so I'm going to stop you there.
Okay, all right.
For the experienced painters, then that's a term that they're all familiar with. So I'll apologize to them in advance. Let's just make sure that you articulate what value is. If it's somebody who's new, entering painting for the first time, or or thinking about experiencing painting, why don't you go ahead and touch on what value means?
Value is the relationship of dark to light, and all of the, let's say from lightest white to blackest black, and each level, let's say you had 10 levels of increasing gray, so that each layer, and you first think about it in terms of black and white, each layer of gray will occupy a certain place in space in relationship to the one next to it. So then let's say we add color to it. The value of an area is the general overall tone of the lights and shadows in that area. It must be, am I being too complex?
No, I think you've simplified it well.
Okay, so if you're creating an illusion of deep space, the strongest darks and the strongest lights must be in the foreground. And then with each progressive plane that you're going back in space, the relationship changes. The darks get a little bit less intense, and the lights get a little bit less intense as you're going back until you have layers at the very back of the space that have very little contrast between light and shadow. It's just like if you were driving up the Sierra, the things that you see the mountains going back in space, you obviously see that they get grayer and grayer, or actually gray bluer and gray bluer, depending on how much atmosphere there is. And so it's the same principle, making sure that you're doing that right on the surface of your painting as a first thought. So two things I look at when I'm looking at a painting for the first time. I look at the values, the tones, and relationship of tones of each area. And I adjust those to create the illusion of space, so that, because the painting values aren't going to be quite as intense as the ones you see out in real life. And by the time they get back to the back, they're almost completely neutral. There are exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's the idea.
So for the beginning painter, when you do workshops for beginners, if you do that, do you...
I do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you request that they do value studies initially? Do you recommend they try that at home?
Yes. Yeah, what I would do would be to take, I think if let's say you're at home and you're working from a photograph, you might want to print it out in black and white, and be very, very careful about just discerning in the photograph, picking a photograph that does change value as it's going back. But confusing value and color is so easy for the beginning student to do, and the processes need to be separate. Because when I come to teach a workshop, even for some advanced students, what they're most wrestling with is value, tonal value, because and tonal value is much more powerful and potent than any other means for creating space.
Well, you can make a painting come completely together in a tonal value of black and white or some color in white, you can make a beautiful painting without any color. I had a recent experience. I was doing a portrait, and I was struggling with the portrait because the skin tones were a little different than I was used to, and so I just took all the color off of my palette, and I did it in a Prussian blue mixture with some red to create kind of a brownish burnt sienna. And I painted the whole thing in that tone, just, dark to light. And what was nice about it is that it just takes all the extra thinking process out. The minute you add color, everything becomes more complicated. And for someone who's beginning, and of course we all want to do great paintings from the beginning, but I think this is a great exercise, is to just start out by doing a painting that is in black and white or gray and white or some variation, so that you have the ability to think about learning value first, because you can always take a value study. And first off, I see those. Charlie Hunter does a fabulous job of that. His paintings are all essentially value studies, and they sell very well. But also you can then glaze those value studies and then put the color in over in the technique you were talking about earlier in acrylic or otherwise.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it makes all the difference in the world. Exactly what you said, to understand how values work together. It's just because people who don't understand value tend to use color too blithely. They think that their imaginative color is something inventive or new. It's not. For the most part, artists will use color brightly to cover the fact that they have absolutely no idea about value. I mean, that's a general rule. Some people dislike color. But the secret I've found over the years with most artists who are good colorists is that they understand value, because the secret of great color is not lots of color, but gray.
Okay, but let's talk about
neutrals.
Being neutral. I would agree with that, and I have found that as my taste develops over time, I tend to make things more gray, and I'll put little highlights of color, little spots of color that make everything else feel like it's coming together. But I think one of the most difficult things for an artist, especially outdoors, are greens. So I'm staring at a vibrant green, brilliant color green field, and I try to paint that, and it looks garish. And yet you go back to the paintings of some of the people in the past, and they have really toned that down. They don't put that garish paint in there. So talk about painting greens. Talk about painting, what you see versus what you know is going to look right.
Well, that's just a great question. I was thinking, as you were saying that, about William Wendt, and some of his greens are quite garish and intense. Green is probably the hardest color, as you know, to get it to look like light is hitting it without making it garish. I will often use touches of orange to make my greens look like sunlight is hitting them. That's a tough question right off the top of my head.
Well, that's what I get paid to do. I'm supposed to ask tough questions.
Yeah, and I'm paid to be quiet. No, I think just the control of the value of the green from the very beginning, by using its complement or browns, or even a little bit of purple with a phthalo, you get a nice green gray. It's just being able to see the relationships and then toning them down enough that they don't look, toning them down with perhaps in some cases a white, but rarely a white.
Well, a white, I think one of the things that I struggle with is, if the minute you throw white in, you risk getting chalky.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And also you don't get that light being, you don't get the light being absorbed. Let's say it's an alfalfa field, or even a field of wheat or something that's coming up green, and it's very, very intense, but there's shadows cast into it.
One thing that Matt Smith taught me at the workshop recently, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is that he said whenever your paintings look chalky, then it's probably because your shadow, your warm-cool relationship is wrong. So you've got too much cool in your lights, and typically if you warm up your lights and you cool down your shadows, the chalkiness goes away.
Yeah, that's exactly true. And instead of using, for example, a white with a green, a little Naples yellow will go a long way to keeping it from getting chalky. It acts like a white hit with sunlight. So it's an important color for me in my palette. A Naples yellow or a Naples yellow light, depending on what I want to do. Sometimes, if I'm painting the coast, for example, I'll use a Naples yellow light instead of ever even touching my white. But something you said there. But the one thing about a shadow that's crossing a field of green is it must have some of the and with rock, with water, anything, it can't be an arbitrary color. It has to have some of the shadow has to have some of the local color in it.
Can you explain local color if to the person?
Well, okay, let's say, yeah, sure. It has to have some of the color of that object, whether it's a rock or a field. It has to have some of the color, the natural color of that substance, whatever it is.
Okay, so let me just clarify that for everybody.
Okay.
So if you're painting a green field and that green is in shadow, so that green is actually now kind of a bluish color, you paint that shadow in and then you throw a little bit of green into it so that it feels like you have a sense of
Yeah, exactly. So that the light's bouncing in there, and it's showing the real color. If you don't put the real color of whatever the shadow has been cast across, if you don't put that in, it won't look like a shadow across a particular surface.
So do you just put little spots of it in there?
Well, I may very lightly glaze into let's say the blue of the shadow, the coolness of the shadow. I might glaze some of the texture of the very thin layer of the texture of the grasses in their natural color, probably toned down so that it looks like it doesn't appear from a distance to be painted into, but rather it looks like the shadow's going across.
Right.
It's serious. I don't think I've explained it well, but just suffice it to say that just to paint a cool shadow across, let's say there's a rock, and I in fact Matt Smith is who I learned this from. He didn't know it, but we went down the Grand Canyon together the first time I met him years and years ago, and I looked at what he was doing, and I was exhausted, so I was sitting just watching, and he was such a master that he was painting a draw up the canyon, a draw with some foliage and big boulders and things like that. And I thought, as I was watching him, that he was painting it exactly. And then I looked and I saw the subtlety of how he had moved objects, their direction and things, and then how he had included the color of whatever surface it was, let's say a rock face. He had included the color of the natural color of the rock into the shadow, whether it was done afterwards or at the time.
Right.
So that it looked like a shadow that was being cast across that kind of a surface.
Kind of a reflected light.
The reflected light and the color of that surface. So the other thing about that I want to say is that there's so many artists these days who are using purple as their shadow color, and just blatantly. Purple is not a shadow color. Purple is purple. And if you use it as a shadow color, whether it's a dark purple or if it's a whatever it is, it's going to look like a big purple mass. It's not going to sit down in space. It's not going to look like it's crossing across a certain particular surface. It's going to look like a purple blob. And it does, then it won't become it's neutral. Boy, I'm getting too complex, aren't I? It won't become it won't create the negative space you need it to create. The shadow has to sit down. It has to sit back in space. It has to go back in space from the front of the shadow to the back. And if all of the intensity is this purple, it isn't going to do that.
So what color are you using? You're using blue.
Well, I don't use. I don't have a standard.
Well,
I will
obviously every scene is different, but what's a starting point? If you say purple is not the color of a shadow, what is the color?
Well,
of a shadow?
there may be purple in it.
Right.
Okay, so there may be subtle purple in it. It's just that the blobs of purple don't sit back in space. But I use black. I'm not afraid of black. I use the opposite. I'll use a red with a green, and then tone it down with a deep, like say a Prussian blue or black. Whatever it does to make that, whatever I have to do to mix to make that shadow look authentic.
Let's move to a different direction, because we've talked a little bit about technique, and I think some really great tips in there. Let's talk a little bit about philosophy. I know that is one of your favorite topics.
Yeah.
You first off, why is it that you paint?
Well, I paint because I couldn't not paint. I've loved it from the beginning, and I look forward to my studio every day still, and it's been 50 years. So I can say that, or 45. I can say that I'm passionate about it, but it's the underlying philosophy, and that is that I'm saying something about beauty that is very important to me. We live in a society in which we look to, and this is a real soapbox for me, but we look to grosser images to satisfy ourselves, and they become grosser and grosser and grosser because we're because we need constant satisfaction from and stimulation. So sex has become more graphic, and violence has become more graphic. If you go to how often have you seen Tom Cruise almost hit by a car that's flying through space? We feed from a feed trough as a society of filth. The way C.S. Lewis said, there may be the most glorious scene in the world. You might even be looking at the very face of God, and we have a tendency to play in the mud and not look at the greatness. That's a paraphrase, but we do have a tendency to feed on images and ideas that are are horrid, and it's gotten more and more. My philosophy is I think that we should be feeding on images that glorify what's beautiful around us, and try to, and it's a meditation for me, to think about the beauty of things, because it reminds me of the purest and the noblest and what's true and about the universe. And so, in a sense, I'm taking on the role of one of the mentors to people who don't know how to appreciate what's around them. And so I can be thrilled. Well, I can be thrilled by a tractor as much as I can be thrilled by a beautiful scene, or I can see an old truck and the light hitting the truck and be as thrilled with that because it represents the nobility, the things that represent the nobility of hard work, or mastery of certain qualities of life, like kindness, or and when you see that in somebody's face, you can't mistake it. So I tried, or joy. I have a painting of a African American girl walking down the street, a man watering his lawn, and he's looking at her as she's singing. You can tell she's singing by the way her mouth is open and the light's striking both of them. And it is, even though it's a very simple everyday scene, it's noble. And I think that nobility is one of the great marks of beauty. It can be in a child. It can be in a hard worker. It can be in a mountain face. So that's how I try to link up the various subjects that I paint. So I'm talking about my faith, my beliefs, through the medium of showing how beautiful things are.
Okay, then. All right, that helps.
Which I hope that wasn't too complex, but I do love God, and I love the beauty of things, and I try to make that the basis for how I make my decisions about what I'm going to paint.
You've been painting for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still struggle?
Oh, yes, sure. One of my struggles is a very one that you mentioned earlier, which is I like different mediums. I'm really trying to force myself just to do one medium right now to simplify my life. But I struggle with, well, first of all, I think the biggest struggle for me has been over the years accepting my role and my career for what it is and not what I had hoped it would be.
Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What had you hoped it would be?
I had hoped it would be self-sustaining financially. I hoped that the sales would grow significantly through time, and they had been until 2008, of course. I had hoped that I would eventually be able to support my family. So, and yes, we have significant investments, and everybody's going along fine, but it never reached what I thought I wanted. And so I struggle with representation, making certain that I'm where I want to be in terms of the galleries that represent me and things like that. And then trying to expand the basis of my subject matter so that even though I'm a little bit more universal in the kind of things I paint, that each of them have the same quality of finish. And you know, because I like figures as much as I liked, and I taught figure drawing for 30 years, I like figures as much as I like the landscape. And I think that it just depends on what you're trying to say at one time, what kind of device you use. So that said, my struggles are not so much technical anymore as probably making sure that my work gets seen, that kind of thing.
So, what is your definition of a great painting?
Wow. Well, one that is technically, first of all, designed beautifully. There's no inconsistency of design. It's obvious that the artist thought it out, but that it doesn't look contrived. Like, say, for example, if you went, yes, Rubens was a great painter. His designs are contrived. I like a painting that doesn't show all of that. I like a painting that has a mood that is very convincing, a design that is subtle enough that it doesn't look designed, and a conviction in the painting, an authenticity in the painting. And obviously this is not for all paintings. Obviously there's, you could have a pile of bricks in the corner of a museum and you wouldn't necessarily know all these things about it, but that it convinces me that artist knew where he was or where she was and what she wanted to say and how she and the conviction about how she said it, regardless of whether the subject matter satisfies me or not. If I'm judging a show, I don't look for a painting that satisfies me in terms of its subject. Nor do I look necessarily for a painting that is original, because there's very few original paintings, that are convincingly original. But I look for the authenticity, and I think Joe Paquette talks about this a lot, the authenticity of the painting as separate from anything else. Does the mood convince me? Does the way the stroke is handled convince me? Is it satisfying? And is it an example of real command and mastery of its intent? I know all that sounds very abstract, but if I could look to one thing, it would be that the painting convinces me that artist was there. He knew what he or she was doing, and he knew he mastered it.
So what are the core essentials that when you're teaching a workshop, what are the core essentials that you want to make sure that everybody leaves with?
Understanding of value, understanding that great color is not the result of lots of color, but of controlled color, using every advantage of the neutrals, meaning the grays and the browns that are mixed from the complements. The idea that they understand that design is not just top to bottom and side to side, but also front to back, so that they are using bounce light in such a way that they can understand the backside of something as much as the front side. Because when an artist understands bounce light, it's more important. It's her ability to create an authentic deep space is really enhanced. So those are the qualities that I look for and try to communicate.
From the standpoint of someone that inspires you, if you get into the doldrums and you need to be inspired and you're going to pick up one art book or one website or go look at one particular painting, any painting in the world, what's the painting that's going to inspire you and get you re-energized and re-excited?
Wow. Well, I have one that changed my life, so I'll start with that, and that's Vermeer's Woman with the Red Hat. I was just got out of college, and I was a poor person, but I was teaching a woman to paint, and of course I didn't know anything myself, but she had on her coffee table a book of Vermeer's, and the Woman with the Red Hat was in there, and it changed my life. I couldn't believe my eyes, and in fact, I've been back to Washington, D.C. 3 times just to see it. It's in the National Gallery. It's just a tiny little painting, but transformed everything. And I don't paint that well, but I do paint. I try to paint with that kind of impact. That's one painting. The contemporary painters I love, most particularly the paintings by Joe McGurl have moved me that way. Paintings by John Cosby have moved me that way. Paintings by Joe Paquette have moved me that way. And Kim Lortier also does that for me with her pastels. But otherwise, I go to the websites. Oh, Ru Lee.
Lee?
Ru Lee. RUO capital LI. He's a seascape painter. Fabulous painter. Very inspiring. His designs, everything about what he does is he lives. He's a member of the California Art Club and he lives in the Los Angeles area.
Okay. All right. So, final question.
Mm-hmm.
I ask everybody this question to see what they come up with. So it's your final day on Earth. Every painting that you've created has disappeared. Any documentation of you as a painter has disappeared. You have your friends and family gathered around you on your deathbed, and you are allowed to share with them 3 truths before you close your eyes. They could be truths about life, about painting, about anything. What are those 3 truths?
You should have sent me this first.
I never do because I want to make people do it off the top of their heads.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is do what you do with all your heart and mind, and work hard until you've accomplished that. Even though it may only be a drop in the bucket of the universe with 900 billion galaxies, it still is important. everything is important, because it's all one. The second thing would be, and I don't know if I put this in the first, but love. Love is so important. Friendships are so important. And third, that even though we live on a fallen planet, whatever's going on here, we don't really know. We see through the glass darkly, as Paul said. Love it and cherish its beauty and love its creator, because there's purpose to everything. And I think that those are the three things I would say. Now, probably after I hang up, I'll think of 10 more. But
of course you will. That is, I think that's all wonderful. I think it says a lot about you. You know, one of the things that I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the years is that you are truly all about love. You put other people first. You're interested in them. You project love in everything that you do, and I think that's how I would remember you. Is that that's what you're all about? Is that you're not? You strike me as one who has put your ego aside. I'm sure it's something we all battle with, but you are more interested in others than you are telling your own story or about yourself.
Oh, thank you, because that's what I try to do. I love people, and I try to see the good in them. So, well, thank you. That's very touching, and I hope it's true.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate this time today.
Oh, thank you. Take care of yourself. And I look forward to participating in the pastel demo next year.
Oh, at the PleinAir convention. Well, we're glad you're coming.
Yeah.
Thanks again to Gil Dellinger for a wonderful interview. He's a really sweet man. The interview was sponsored by easelbrushclip.com. It is a cool tool. Everybody's picking them up and putting them on their easels. I have one on my studio easel, actually one on each side of my studio easel. So I got my brushes there, keep palette knives in it, keep some pens and things in them. I have one on my computer monitor. I have one that I carry with me for my PleinAir kit, keep my brushes in. And it's pretty nice. It's a cool tool. You can watch the video at easelbrushclip.com. The podcast, episode number 17, is brought to you by the Publishers Invitational Paint Camp. It is coming up next week, and at the time of this recording, we've got a couple of seats left. If you have some time and you're looking for something fun to do, it's a chance to come to the beautiful Adirondack Mountains, roll out of bed, have all your meals served to you, and paint all day with 125 of your friends. There's no competition, no show, just painting every day in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. It is a ball, and it's limited to 125 people. We all become very, very close friends after spending a week together, and we get really good at painting after doing 2 or 3 paintings together all day at these amazing waterfalls and vistas. It's pretty incredible. So if you want to learn more about it, you can visit publishersinvitational.com. Also have one coming up this fall at Acadia National Park. It's called Fall Color Week. You can learn about that at fallcolorweek.com. Well, the PleinAir movement is really hot, and that may be why PleinAir magazine continues to be the top representational art magazine sold nationwide at Barnes & Noble. So drop by, pick one up. You can get a bi-monthly subscription for about half the price of the newsstand at pleinairmagazine.com. That's Plein, P-L-E-I-N. Well, this is always fun. I love doing this. Brings me back to my old days of radio. Let's do it again sometime, like maybe next week. We'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhoads. I'm the publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there, so go paint it. Bye-bye.